Hi, I'm Dottie Grover, host for Transparency in Government, and we're glad to have you join us today. We're going to be discussing some of the things that are going on around town, and as we do each month, we're meeting with Kevin. Kevin is our town manager, Kevin Smith, and we're going to discuss several of the issues that you've been seeing in the papers, maybe watching on the town council meetings. So, Kevin, let's go right to the town meeting and the voting.
Okay, could I interject one thing before we get
What
there,
did I
Dottie? Because
do?
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, and I don't want to forget it.
Okay.
You know, as a former, or as a Lancer alumni, I should say, very proud of a lot of the winter sports Lancer teams this year. We had, for the first time since 1986, the same school won both the girls and boys Division I basketball titles.
Wow.
Nashua did it back in '86, and now Londonderry has done it in 2015. And just tremendous seasons by both the girls and the boys. I had the pleasure of being able to attend both of the championship games. The boys was probably a little bit more intense than the girls was, though you expect nothing less when you're playing Pinkerton.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it was a Pinkerton game, yeah.
But both, and of course the boys went undefeated this season. First title in the school's history. Really impressive, so kudos to them, congratulations to them. The wrestling team also won the state championship this winter, and I believe the robotics team is now moving on to New England.
They're great every year, yeah.
Lot to brag about
Yes.
in Lancer Nation
Yes.
this year.
Yeah.
And little good news on the town side as far as awards or accolades. There was a ranking that had come out recently from Blue Water Mortgage in which it ranked best towns and cities in New Hampshire to live in. And Londonderry ranked number 2
Wow.
on that list.
And we don't even have to move. We're here.
And we're here, exactly. Number 1, I will say, was Portsmouth.
Okay.
And I think, you know, there was probably a little bias because they have an ocean nearby, and so
We can't do that
you
part.
can't compete with an ocean.
Well, although I don't know if you know this little known fact, but we were at one time under salt water.
I didn't know that, Dottie.
Yes, originally we were.
Originally.
Yes.
How far back
Yeah.
you going?
Well, Melvin Watts used to be the town historian,
Okay.
and he's the one that put me on to that.
Really?
And I guess they can tell that by the geology of and biology of the area.
So at one time there was oceanfront property
There
in Londonderry,
was,
is what
yes,
you're telling me.
yeah. But we didn't have a walking downtown and theaters and museums and all that. So Portsmouth does have some good draws.
Oh, Portsmouth is a great city, but you know, to have Londonderry come in at number 2, and if you look at the criteria on why it was ranked that high, it mentions the fact that Londonderry has a tremendous amount of economic opportunity in town, and you know, a lot of jobs available. So that's great for the town. It's great to be ranking that high, and it's just continued good news for the town in that manner.
Yeah. So did you throw a party?
There was no party.
There was no party. Well,
When we hit number 1, Dottie. When we hit number 1,
Okay.
then we'll throw a party.
Okay.
We don't throw a party for second place finishes.
Now I'm thinking Progressive Insurance. No sprinkles on that cone because you're not a winner.
If you say so.
Okay, firefighters.
Yes.
What's going on with the firefighter article?
So we were talking before the show to explain to the audience why, since the article passed, you know, might there be a delay in actually the hiring of the firefighters and whatnot.
In passing, then people feel it's the will of the people.
Sure, and
that
that's
easy.
Yeah, and the reality is that every article is always advisory in our town form of government. Now, in this particular article, the vote from the town council was a 2-2 vote, and you had one abstention by Councilor Butler. Everything else, aside from the budget itself, was a unanimous vote.
And he abstained because his son is a firefighter, correct?
Yes. And so even though the warrant article passed overwhelmingly, it's still, you know, the council is going to take it under advisory to determine how to go forward. Now, that being said, if you've read the comments in the newspapers, I think there's agreement among the council that the voters did speak overwhelmingly, and the will of the voters isn't to be easily
Taken lightly.
dismissed and taken lightly. But there's still concern among the council about making sure that we rein in overtime costs as best we can. And so I think the feeling is that the council wants to work with the fire department and vice versa, and making sure that going forward expectations are met of both sides. And I view my job as town manager to bring both those sides together and
Right.
to be interacting with the fire department and the town council to see that needs are met and expectations are met of both sides. And I think we'll get there. I think we'll get to a point where everybody knows what we're going to be doing going forward. We will eventually bring the additional firefighters on. And so I don't view this being a contentious
That's
matter
good,
moving
okay.
forward, because I think both sides do want to work towards the same goal. And,
Okay.
and you know, to credit the fire department, they've worked very hard this year to try to limit their overtime costs as much as possible. On the town council meeting on April 6th, there'll be a presentation by the fire department to go over, they'll be doing analysis of where all the overtime's taken place this year. And a lot of it has to do with replacement costs. When you think of overtime, it's you can't think of it when you're thinking about it with the fire department as just traditional overtime of people
Right,
working.
like it was an 8-hour day and I stayed
Right.
2 extra hours. That's
It's
not
very
the case.
different. We have a lot of what's called replacement costs. We try to have a minimal staffing number in town. And so when one firefighter is out due to injury, illness, vacation, we typically
you do?
bring
Yeah.
someone in to replace that person so that those minimal staffing numbers are met. Now,
And minimal, you're not saying minimal just because you want to save money and only have a minimum of people. We are
it's
covering.
minimum based on the amount of firefighters you'd like to have at each station and on each
so that they can function.
apparatus.
They can go out on the
Correct.
the calls and have the right number of people.
Because you can have, I mean, we have 3 stations. We have
yeah.
a lot of apparatus. You throw 5 guys on a shift, though, you're going to have a lot of apparatus not being used
Right.
when there's a call.
Right.
So just because you have the stations and the apparatus there, if you don't have the staff there, it doesn't mean that it necessarily gets used.
Right.
So we'll be showing an analysis of where all the replacement time has come from this year. We've had a number of long-term injuries
Yes,
from
yeah.
some of our firefighters, some long-term illnesses. We've had positions that had not been able to get filled for a while, and we had to use replacement costs for that. We had 2 major snowstorms.
Did we?
Believe it or not, I know, right? We didn't have a bad winter. So we had 2 major snowstorms where we had extra staffing on them. And then we had a pretty major structure fire at Hall Road, on Hall Road at the junkyard. So, you know, if you actually take those events I just mentioned and you parse them out and put them to the side, the actual regular replacement overtime costs are actually running below budget. But there's those unforeseen things that come up that really
Right.
are out of anyone's control, that are causing the overtime numbers to go higher.
And if you didn't have the overtime numbers, you'd be staffing more people with straight time.
Right.
And does that make sense on an ongoing basis? Like every day, you don't need that. So
You're saying if you didn't have if you didn't have, if you had a full complement every day, you're not paying overtime.
right,
But the reality is, due to these unforeseen things that happen, you're not always able to have just a regular full complement, 365 days
Yep.
a year. So you anticipate a certain amount of overtime and replacement time happening, but then there's these other things, as I mentioned, that are out of our control. We have a very stringent hiring process that both the police and fire fighters go through, which include background checks
Right.
and a polygraph. And not everyone passes those things. And
don't name names.
no, but I bring that up because the
it's-
reality is when that happens, you then go back to
Back.
square one and you bring in the new candidate.
Right.
So you go through an interview process, you select your candidates, you put them through the process, and if they fail the process, that all
gotta
takes
do it
time.
again, yeah.
But while that's happening, it's not like you're not staffing that position. What you're doing is you're staffing it with another firefighter, but you're paying that person now time and a half because they're replacing
Right.
the body that isn't there. So, so you add all of these things up, and that's really what's driving a lot of the replacement costs right now. And as I said, the fire department they've done a lot. They're doing a lot better than they were last year at this time in controlling those replacement costs. And in some of the areas where we had discussed in public last year, whether it be in callbacks, concurrent duties, admin time that were taking up a good amount of overtime last year, those have been reduced minimally. In fact, replacement costs are making up roughly 88% of the overtime now, and everything else is taking up 12%.
Okay.
So we're moving in the right direction. There's still a little ways to go, but we're definitely moving in the right direction there.
And they're going to give you a full report on
They'll
April
be
6th?
on April 6th. As I said, we'll be doing a regular budget update as
Okay.
to where we're at going into the last 3 months, the last quarter of the year, fiscal year, and then the fire department will be doing an update specific to their department.
Okay.
So, and I mean, you look at our budget; it's running a little bit over right now, the total budget, and a good portion of that is due to the fact that
It snowed.
it snowed a lot,
Yeah.
and it snowed frequently. And you can't do anything to control the weather,
Nope.
but people expect their roads to be plowed and sanded when it does snow out. So, and those drove up costs.
Now, this is an aside here, but did I read something about a new policy on mailbox replacements?
You probably did, Dottie. So, this was when I came last year. It doesn't happen often that we
Right.
hit a mailbox, but it does happen sometimes. And
I hid mine behind a telephone pole.
you, say that again. You
I
what?
hid mine behind a telephone
Oh, you
pole.
hit it behind a.
Yeah, H-I-D.
Yes.
Yeah.
What do you mean you hit it behind a?
So they'd have to knock the telephone pole down to knock their mailbox down.
Oh, excellent. So now we're replacing telephone poles as well. Then that's good to know. Make note of that, Janos. So I would hear about, complaints that would come in if we hit someone's mailbox, and the town isn't liable for
Right.
it.
Because those mailboxes are actually on town property.
Right.
Yeah.
And we give advice as to where to place the mailboxes so that it's not directly in the right of way. At the same time, it's got to be close enough so that the mailman delivers
reach.
it,
Yeah.
can deliver the mail. And for the most part, I mean, our plow drivers do a really good job of avoiding
They do.
mailboxes, but sometimes inevitably they get hit. I looked at what other communities do. A lot of them do exactly what Londonderry does, and they just don't do anything. But some of them do the replacement mailboxes. I looked at the number typically on an annual average that are hit, what the cost is to replace it, and said, I think it's good services to our residents that live here,
Yeah.
given the minimal number that do get hit, to replace them. Folks pay taxes in this
You're
town.
investing in goodwill.
Well, I just, again, I
It's
think it's a service that we can provide to the residents in the town without it costing
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah.
But I think it goes a long way in building goodwill towards the folks who live here.
I agree.
And we've had a lot of positive feedback from folks that, called one day and said my mailbox was hit, and the next day the public works guys
It's
are
there.
out there
Yeah.
already replacing
Yeah.
it, and how much they just appreciated the fact that we were doing it.
Yeah.
So, I get teased by our public works director that, boy, you picked a great winner to implement that policy.
That's true.
How was I to know? I didn't read the Farmer's Almanac before I enacted it, but as I said, I think it's a good policy to have in town.
I do too. I think it was a great idea.
Well, thank
So.
you. Every now and then, Dottie.
Hey,
As
long as you're thinking about what the people want, need, deserve,
Well,
and then within your best, efforts to do that, I think people will then be satisfied that you.
Well, and
are
one of
trying
the
to do
things
service.
we're going to be doing when we mail out the tax bills this spring is we're going to be including in there a questionnaire about how people feel about town services. Do you
okay.
generally like the way they're going? What improvements could we make? And we're going to be looking for feedback from the folks that live in town to tell us how can we do our jobs better. How can we
Terrific.
improve customer service in town? What are some things you think are working well? And what are the things where you say, oh, could you
Let's do
maybe do
better.
this better? You know, and because we're here to serve the citizens in the town.
Yeah.
They pay our salaries. And so we want to provide a good service back to them. And, you know, when we can work together like that, you know, again, I think that makes for a more responsive town government, and people feel like they're getting a good bang for their buck. So
I
those
know
would be,
that one of the things that people are often saying, well, where I lived before,
Yeah.
where I came from, this is the way they did things.
Right.
We have a lot of those people in Londonderry, and there may be some really great ideas that you will want to implement.
absolutely,
So,
absolutely. And
I think it's great to ask.
yeah, and certainly, you know, we may get some ideas of there's just things we can't do based on
Oh,
either
sure.
our form of government. You know, it's New Hampshire municipal government is very different from that of Massachusetts,
Absolutely,
New York,
yeah.
Pennsylvania, and different areas. But there's some stuff that we, you know, potentially can do. I always go back to saying if you look at the amount of services that we have here in town between our full-time fire department, police department, the public works, trash pickup, we provide a lot of
lot.
services for, you look at the tax rate, it's really low compared to other surrounding communities
Yes.
and what services they provide.
getting,
Litchfield, for example, has a volunteer fire department, does not have curbside pickup for trash, has a very small police department. You know, the services are a lot less. Their tax rate is only 50 cents less than Londonderry's.
Yeah.
So you get a pretty good bang for your buck here in town. That said, there's always room for improvement, and we want to know how we can improve.
Absolutely. I like that. I like asking the people. I think sometimes the local governments are afraid to ask because they don't know what they're going to hear back. But I think it's always a good thing to hear what people want
Sure.
and what they think is important. So, okay, speaking of things that people feel is important, Stonehenge.
Yep.
I know there was some dissension is the right word, but there are a number of residents who were not really happy with the fact that Stonehenge, this is workforce housing, right? Excuse me, that they actually got their variances that they had asked for originally. Can you explain a little bit more about that process? I know we've touched on it before, but I think it bears repeating.
Yeah, well, you know, and people have to, I think, understand the different roles of the planning board versus the zoning board.
Right.
Planning is where you get into all of the stuff about design, whether it fits in with the master plan, all of the traffic studies, all of that gets done at the planning board level.
Right.
The zoning board is simply a quasi-judicial board where it's just the facts, ma'am. And they have to make decisions based on rules and on law and on state statute. That is their job.
So the state statute plus whatever we've enacted locally that they have to
Right.
abide by.
Correct. Yeah, and our ordinances have to complement what the statutes are.
Right.
So, you know, for them, if you look at, you know, there were already a couple of other workforce housing projects that had received variances from the zoning board, the same variances that Stonehenge had asked for. And, you know, every project is looked at by itself, but nonetheless, you know, they have to take that into
Sure.
consideration. And so at the end of the day, the zoning board came to the conclusion that, okay, they meet all of the different criteria, the 5 points, that when someone comes and asks for a variance, they met those points. And so they came to the conclusion that, at least for the variance part, that they were to receive those variances. But again, how the project will look, what traffic modifications are going to have to be made as a result, all of that will take place at the planning board level.
Right. So basically, this just got them to the planning board.
Correct.
In a way. Okay.
In a way,
Yeah.
sure. And you know, and there's also an ongoing the workforce housing ordinance, a revision to it. That's going through the planning board level right now as well. because what grew out of this, what has grown out of really this whole discussion about workforce housing, and it didn't just start with Stonehenge,
No.
but started with, the first few that were approved is, what is it about, because so far every workforce housing project, there's 4 of them, 2 have been approved and 1 is currently being built. The other one I think will probably start in the spring. And then there's 2 right now that have been through the ZBA. But the commonality among all 4 is they've all gone to the zoning board for variances.
variance.
When that happens, it causes you to say, okay, why is everyone
Why
going for
are we-
variances?
right.
What is it about our current ordinance that is apparently too restrictive that they had to go to the ZBA for relief? And now those things are being tidied up, so to speak, in this new ordinance that's been posted.
And these people are going to have more opportunity to speak as this goes through the planning board
Absolutely.
process. They'll be able to be there and
Absolutely.
speak.
And that's no different than right now there's another development, much smaller, but for a wine bistro
Yes.
that has asked for a zoning change.
Stumble in?
No, this is
No.
Cabernet,
That's
the
it,
wine
yes,
house,
okay,
the wine
yeah,
house and bistro.
yeah.
They've asked for a zoning change from C4 to C1 in the area behind Dunkin' Donuts along 102. And again, a lot of the discussion that has come up at the town council public hearing about the rezoning had to do with lighting, traffic, parking, all of those things, planning board
Planning board.
stuff. The town council simply going to look at whether or not it's appropriate to rezone the area. But then all of those other design, I'll place under the design category, is all planning board.
Okay.
It'll be worked out with the planning board.
Okay. So
Yeah.
everybody has their piece that they take care of.
That's right.
And there's no place where people can't stand up and have their say.
No, and that's the great
So
thing
that's-
is
yeah.
People can come in, they've had adequate time to talk in front of the ZBA, they'll have adequate time to talk in front of the planning board, and if it, in the case of a zoning change, goes before the town council, they're very good about allowing people to speak.
Yeah.
It's so important, too,
It is
that
important.
people are allowed to speak, whatever the issue is, and for however long they want to, so long as
And
they're
I
not
think-
filibustering.
Yeah.
But that
Exactly.
they get to be heard.
I think that's really important for people to know that they have that opportunity to speak. I think it's just as important for them to understand that after they do speak, and whichever board they're in front of is taking what they said under consideration,
Right.
it has to be taken under consideration in the context of those state RSAs
Right.
and the local ordinances
Right.
that are in place right now.
Yep.
So maybe some of these will be changed. I know the ZBA ordinances are being totally looked over and revamped. So maybe it will be a little bit down the road that their actual point of view gets incorporated into some of the process. But
Right.
it can't always happen right at
Right.
right away.
Yep.
So, but that is frustrating, I know, because I want it to change now. I want
Right.
you to listen to me today.
Right.
But
Right.
changes happen slowly.
Well, yeah, and there's a good reason for that
There
too.
is.
Because if you change things too quickly, you don't want to make rash decisions. You want to make
Right.
sure your decisions are well thought out, that you move methodically so that you don't make mistakes along the way.
Yeah, yeah. I think the best line, I've said this to people that have been in office previously too, I think the best line that an elected official can have is, I'm going to take that under consideration, because then they're not caught up in the heat of the moment. Or
Right.
they can go back, they can look at it, they can think about it, they can compare to see where it
Right.
where
Or
it
even,
works, so.
I'll give you another one along those lines, is that when someone says, I don't know the answer to that, but let me
Yes.
find out and I'll get
Yeah.
back to you.
Always
There's
happy
nothing
with
wrong
that.
with, if you don't know the answer, there's nothing wrong
I
with
don't
saying,
know.
I don't know,
Yeah.
but let me look into it and I'll find
I
out.
totally agree with you.
Yeah.
One of my favorites. So, okay, one of the other things we're going to talk about today, I have to keep looking here. I noticed that the Elder Affairs Committee
Yes.
had some concerns about the appointment process.
Yep.
And you did address their concerns, I saw that as well. But I thought, there's probably a lot of people that don't understand how that appointment process works. And we have a constant influx of new people.
Right.
Do they even understand that all they have to do is just say, I want to sit on that board, and they will be considered?
Yeah, so the council revamped how it goes about doing a board and commission appointments going forward earlier this year. And the reason it came about is because what was happening is a lot of the boards would come into the council and say, we want to reappoint these 3 people. Their terms are up.
Yeah.
We want to reappoint them. And would reappoint them. They're back on the board. But it never gave the opportunity for somebody
Anybody
new
Yeah.
to want to serve.
Yeah.
So what we decided is any time someone's term is up on a board or committee, we're going to post those positions. And even if someone wants to reapply, they can reapply for it.
Yeah.
But they're going to be treated like anybody
same.
else. They're going to be treated the same. And so that's what we've done now. So when the appointments came up on the Elderly Affairs Committee, we posted it, advertised it for anybody that wanted to do it. We got folks who asked to be reappointed, but we also got folks that wanted to serve on the committee as well. And what we've also said is that if the boards have recommendations for the council, they're more than welcome, and we'd encourage them to let us know. Who they are. Doesn't mean the council's necessarily going to go with their recommendation, but certainly it doesn't hurt for the council to know who the board is recommending be appointed.
Yeah.
So we're still asking for that. We're still asking for the board chairman to come to the council and say, this is who we recommend. But we want to give everyone a fair shot and an equal shot so that the committees aren't perpetually having the same people year after year after year just by getting reappointed through the process that way.
And that's a good goal. I think, I'm just wondering if there's a slightly different way to step through that process that might make sure that the committees feel involved in it and that their say counts, because that's what people want. And then on top of that, this is just a what if, I'm going to throw this out. What if, when people apply for a particular board, you ask them to go to 1 or 2 meetings of that board before they get appointed
I think
or interviewed?
So what we've talked about is because when we post it, say we post it on the website, and someone goes on and they fill out a talent bank form, it gets sent to Kirby, and so Kirby collects it, and then she puts it on for the town council.
Kirby is our wonderful administrative assistant.
That's right. So what Kirby and I discussed, so is we said, going forward, what we'll do is when we get these applicants, we'll send them to the board chairman for that particular committee and make them aware that these people have applied for it, and ask them to reach out to those applicants.
I'm happy.
To find out if they want to come to our meetings, have they been to meetings? Because the council does ask those questions when they're doing the interviews.
Right.
They'll ask, how many meetings have you been to? How often have you been involved?
Have you read the charge?
What's that?
You might want to ask them if
Have
they've
they
read the charge
of
for
the
the
committee?
committee.
Sure, yeah.
Because I know there are a lot of times when people think they're going to
Right.
be doing one thing and it's something very different.
But we want to empower the committees as
Yes,
well, which is
okay.
why we're saying we'll send the names to them
Yeah.
and have them reach out to the applicants and talk to the applicants. And then they can decide how they,
Takes care of my stuff.
yeah. So see that? We're already
You were
addressing
already
that
doing
concern.
it, already
Yeah.
doing it. Okay. Have any other of the boards, committees, commissions, whatever, had any concerns with appointments? Or is it pretty much been running
I think
smoothly?
it's running pretty smooth. There were some bumps in the road. The Conservation Commission for a while was down appointments because we were changing the way we did things around the same time that those were coming in. But now they've got pretty much a full complement back on their board. The Elder Affairs, there was the whole. That's where the whole idea about sending the applicants to the chairman came out of, because they felt like they weren't involved in the process as much as they'd like to be.
Yeah.
We're working out the kinks, but I think going forward it's going to be, as I said, a much more transparent process.
Yeah.
And a much more fair
Transparency in government, we like that.
That's right, we like transparency, always.
Okay, I think that sounds like it's going to work out really well moving forward.
Yes.
I think you wanted to talk about Woodmont.
Yeah, not a
Give
week
us an
goes
update.
by that someone doesn't ask me what's
up?
going on with Woodmont Commons. Is anything ever going to happen? And it looks like that they'll be coming before the planning board sometime in April. I don't believe the agenda has been set yet, but my understanding is that they should be coming into the planning board if not in April, sometime this spring with some. Spring's
coming.
I'm told spring's already here, Dottie. Doesn't look like it if you look outside, but they, I think they'll be coming before the planning board for a conceptual discussion about the first phase of the project and how they'd like to proceed forward. So, for folks who are wondering where it is, what's going on with it, expect to see something soon, I believe, on that front.
Okay.
Yep.
And one of the holdups, I believe, was the road.
Right.
And now that's.
And I would imagine that that's going to be part of the initial discussion is that road that will go from current Garden Drive all the way through behind the old Market Basket up to Pillsbury.
Yes.
I think that's always been, the idea has always been that's the first thing that has to occur for that development. And so I would expect that any discussions.
Yeah, and it wasn't their fault that got set back. It was the whole Market Basket thing.
Exactly.
Kind of put that on hold for a while.
And in my discussions with them that I've had, I mean, that's what they've been saying is they would have loved to have been getting going a lot sooner than it is, but that put a lot of that whole family battle between RDT and RDS really put everything on hold.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, I'm glad that's moving forward, and I'm sure you'll be updating us on that on a pretty regular basis.
Yep.
Another thing passed at the town meeting, that was another SRO, School Resource Officer.
School Resource Officer, so this will be our third School Resource Officer who will be patrolling between the 3 elementary schools.
Great.
And so, again, once the monies come in after the fiscal year, we'll be able to move forward with that hiring, hopefully in time for the start of the new school year next fall.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Anything else happening?
We covered a lot there, Dottie.
I think we did.
There's always a lot happening.
I think we did, yeah.
But certainly, I'd always encourage folks if they want to come up to bend my ear on anything. Second floor of Town Hall. Doors usually always open.
It is usually open, yeah.
And folks can stop in any time.
Yep.
And if it's not open, Kirby will keep them entertained while they wait.
She's very good entertainment. I'd also like to remind you that anything that you'd like to see us discuss on the show, just send us an email, give us a phone call, whatever works for you. We'd be happy to discuss it because it is transparency in government. So we want to let you know what's happening. We'll answer your questions. You can also check the end of the show, and in the credits you will see contact information for me. As the producer host of Transparency in Government, feel free to contact me at either that phone number or that email and let me know what you think, how we can improve things, what you'd like to see us do. And you'll find the contact information for Kevin. I don't think we put down second floor though, but you'll find him. It's not that hard. And in addition to that, we put down contact information for the Londonderry Access Center. We want you to know that you can get involved. You can either produce or host your own show, or you can come and learn how to be a crew member, running the cameras, doing the audio, being a director. It's a lot of fun, and it's all free, and it's here for you. It's basically your First Amendment rights of free speech to be able to do shows at the Londonderry Access Center on their access channels. If you need to find out where the show is happening, on your schedule, you can go to lactv.org and you will find that you can do a live stream of the show, or you can find out what time it's going to be playing on the TV. Many, many methods of getting involved and finding out what's going on. So I hope that we were helpful to you today, and I hope that you're tuning in and letting us know what you want. We'll be watching. And Kevin, thank you very much.
Dottie, thank you as always.
Glad to have you again. Thank you.